It's gone through a number of organizers along the way. So 2002 was when we started. Is anyone around in 2002? Is anyone like part of this group that goes like way back that far? So as you see, like people come and go, people kind of move in and out. We've had 144 meetups. So we've been around for a while, and we've talked about lots of different topics. And it's not just PHP topics. As you see, we cover a lot of back-end technology topics, front-end technology topics. We have more than 3,500 members. So as we see, not everybody shows up for every meetup, but there's always something for somebody that we can do various things with, because primarily we're focused on education. So hopefully at the end of this presentation, you can walk in and pick up some new bits and pieces and then walk away with something that you've learned along the way and hopefully can use. Something a little bit new, something a little bit different, something that you can question, something you thought you were doing kind of the way the textbook says, but maybe you're going to learn something tonight about a little nuance, something slightly different. So one of the things we do for education is back in 2011, January 1st, 2011, we launched what we call our virtual self-study groups. So not only do we get together once a month in this kind of format to meet, but we also meet virtually. So we started up a group called PHP Percolate so we could learn PHP technology. We then moved on to what we call jQuery Jam. So we just finished a jQuery Jam session where we had virtually a lot of folks learning JavaScript and jQuery, and these are our 9 finishers. So what does a finisher mean? Well, we've got the way a virtual self-study group is, we don't really meet in this kind of format, nor do we meet online. So there's no scheduled appointment of any kind. The way we do it is we standardize on one particular book. So since the jQuery Jam session just ended, we are about to start what we call HTML5 grunts. We have these like kind of food-related names to everything we do. So implementing responsive design is the next virtual self-study group. The way it works is everybody starts on the same book, and you read it, and you go through and you do the exercises, and you can post any questions you have to our discussion area at Meetup, on the Meetup site. So it's a great way to go through and learn as a group and feel like you're learning something along the way and kind of feel motivated along the way. So this is what we're going to do over the summer. As you can see, the book is rather on the thin side, so it's good beach reading. However, when we get to the fall, if you really want to get into more heavy-duty PHP stuff, effortless e-commerce is going to be our season 7 for PHP Percolate. So it's going to be more of an intermediate, advanced kind of virtual meetup. So if you have any questions about how the virtual meetup groups work, we have them posted on the front page of the Meetup site, but just see me afterwards and be glad to chat about the details. By the way, since these are the 2 books we will be using for our meetups, these will also be raffle prizes for today's presentation. So if you've got some creative question during the presentation or afterwards, or some insights, our presenter and I will figure out what the best questions are, and we will raffle these off accordingly. So now it's time for just a few announcements. Announcements basically is, first of all, kind of a general feel for the group. How many of you are here at Boston PH Meetup for the very, very first time? Raise your hand. We have a nice collection. We always have a nice new collection of folks. Thanks. So maybe 1 and 4, 1 and 3, 1 and 4. So it's always nice to have a new person in the group. So hopefully it's tonight's presentation that got you in here. Perhaps it's free pizza. But this is an opportunity, since we have some new faces, some unfamiliar faces, to share some information. Maybe you're working for a company and you have opportunities and you want to potentially hire someone. Maybe in the PHP space or the other spaces, it's a good time to do that. Maybe you're in the marketplace yourself and you want to get up and tell a little bit about who you are and what you're looking for. So let's just start off now with anybody who might have an announcement of some way, shape, or form, and feel free to share with the group. Yes, please stand, and please, since we don't have a mic, please project who you are and what the opportunity is.
Hi, my name is Simon. I work at a small biotech company up in Melbourne. I'm the sole developer at the company right now, but we're looking to expand the team to more now. And so we have a position open. If you'd like to talk to me after this presentation, feel free. We're using Laravel. It's a relatively new MVC framework, and trying to do things as properly as possible using modern. We're using PHP 5.4, 5.5. So yeah,
excellent. Thank you. Thank you. It's always nice to hear about new opportunities, especially when you're doubling your workforce. See? And we have a connection right there. Doubling your workforce is always a good thing. Who else? Yes, let's go back.
Everybody hear me in fact? Can you hear me? Okay. My name is James Bukowski. I work for Lexia Learning. We're in Concord, Mass, or West Concord, which is on the Fitchburg MBTA line. We are hiring a senior PHP developer. Our whole platform, administrative platform, is built on PHP. We're currently in rewrite in Laravel. Our product is going to help kids who learn to read. So we actually have an in-class product which drills kids on reading. So if you're interested, or if you know anybody who's interested, please come and see me after the meetup, and we can chat. Thanks.
Back.
Keep the trend going. My name is Joe. I'm the co-founder of a startup. We're just getting going. Still pretty still. I also have a day job, so if you see anyone that knows me, don't tell them. We're working with Zen Framework 2, unlike him. And so I'm looking for anybody who's willing to help part-time now and potentially long-term. Sort of an interesting take on categorizing visual content around the web to help find answers to questions they have. So sort of think about how to. So if you're interested, let me know. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks. Yes.
Hi everybody, my name is Dan. Unlike the other guys, I'm actually looking for employment. I have some PHP experience currently. I'm actually working at a startup right now, and I've been using PHP. Although I am proficient, or I've used Laravel, I'm proficient with JavaScript, and I'm proficient with Beyond Rails. I know this is a PHP, but I guess I'm a full stack. So if anybody is looking for help or they help anything, you see me out here around after the meeting. Thanks.
Awesome. Yes.
Hi, my name is Gladys. I went and invited you all on June 21st. The event happened right here in this building, Code Camp 21. It is a free event. It's here. It's a little bit towards the Microsoft environment, but there is always an opportunity. There are other talks, full talks. It's probably the best way to get yourself updated, because there's going to be all sorts of people coming and giving free lectures, it's free breakfast, free lunch, free other things during the day, and it's a great opportunity to network, to learn new things. It's all free. I don't know yet if there's going to be a sort of kind of smaller place to park here in a garage. I don't know yet, but you can park for free on an MIT parking lot on Hayward Street. It's the only one. Don't try the other ones, you get in trouble. Hayward Street is just about half a block from here. That's it.
Have a website or something like that we can go to for more information?
Yes, you can register on Eventbrite, already open, with all sorts of information. They might have an agenda, but not all the talks are cited there. And if you look for Code Camp 21, yeah, Boston. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yes.
Hello, I'm Neil Collins. I've got a new nonprofit startup called changeleap.org, and I mix together local artists and local nonprofits And I've never blogged nor tweeted, but I have sold some cards. and the approach is gain permission from local artists for their artwork, put them on e-cards or hard cards, and put some of the profit, or most of the profit, into nonprofits, other nonprofits, some of the fun. So any kind of help would be nice. I've just downloaded WordPress.com and Stargazer, and that's right.
Sweet. So as you can see, there are a lot of opportunities, whether they're traditional jobs, whether folks are looking for jobs, whether it's opportunities to meet and collaborate. And we've seen that here at Boston PHP for quite some time now. So we've been kicking around the idea of possibly putting up a job board, and we have some various fits and starts. So what we've decided to do, and we're not quite ready to announce it, but what we're going to do is we've set up a Google group for folks to log in if you're a Boston PH member and share these opportunities. And it's a simple way to distribute those to anyone who signs up to the Google group. And you can share that opportunity if you're looking for a partner, you're looking for a collaborator. And Matt and I and Bobby, who's the other co-organizer, we need to take a close look at that before we announce it. But expect some information about that soon. And if there's enough interest in that kind of networking opportunity and sharing information, then perhaps in the fall we might develop an official job board, and we might be coming to someone in the group to help us, perhaps using Laravel or some other framework to make that happen. So by all means, if you're interested in doing that, if you're interested in sharing opportunities, keep an eye open at Boston PHP Meetup, and we'll have an announcement on that very soon. So, upcoming meetups, June 18th, we have a very special presentation from the representatives of Facebook. They will be here to talk about the code behind Facebook and how that's evolving. Facebook was originally developed in PHP, and that code is they're coming up with their own variations and flavors of stuff. So I think it'll be a very fascinating technical talk about PHP, how PHP has evolved, especially in the Facebook kind of environment. So we'll be announcing that shortly. We're in the process of putting together the final details, but the date is set, so mark your calendar. In July, we hope to do a presentation on Drupal. So if you know someone, or if your particular expertise is Drupal, and you know someone who is proficient at presenting, kind of a getting started presentation on Drupal, a little bit more of an introduction, lower level, or even if it's more advanced, we're interested in hearing about some speakers who have an expertise in that area. So we have a couple other ideas, but that's the one we're looking at right now for July. Then we have our annual Northeast PHP conference. It's a collaboration between the Boston PHP group, but there are two other groups. One PHP group in Vermont and one PHP group in Canada. So this will be the third annual Northeast PHP conference coming up right here at NERD, the weekend of the 6th and the 7th of September. So it's a Saturday and Sunday. So you'll hear about that very soon. You'll hear some announcements about that. We're always looking for speakers. So if you have a particular topic, whether it's PHP related and or maybe user experience related, we would like to hear from you, and we can put you in touch with the groups that's deciding on the speakers and the presenters for that. So please mark your calendars. Yes? Yeah, okay. So the Acquia group?
Well, contact computers, but you might be able to put me in touch with somebody.
You might be sitting someone real close who might also have a similar contact. Who might use similar contact? Chris Perkins, does that sound familiar? Okay. So there's a connection there. But Moshe Weissman is another presenter that we've been in touch with. So
yeah, it might be Moshe. We'll
yeah,
see.
so we might need to circle back to Moshe, and then maybe he'll be the presenter. So yeah, so we appreciate those. Any and all of those connections will be helpful. Great. Awesome. So one of the things that we've been doing informally is we've been videotaping these presentations via Google Hangout. and they will be available. It's available live right now, and then you can go back, and if someone missed this presentation, then you can actually go back and share with your coworkers and friends that they can go online and watch tonight's presentation. We're always looking for sponsorship opportunities. Pizza is welcome and not free. Someone's got to pay for it, so we're always looking for someone who wants to sponsor. And as part of sponsoring, we'll give you opportunities to mention who your company is, talk a little bit about your company, mention your company on our website. So there are sponsorship opportunities available to promote your businesses. And lastly, get involved. So one of the things that we do, that we started up these virtual self-study groups in particular, where we can kind of get them started, but they do have a little bit of momentum on their own. We're always looking for opportunities for people to jump in and do various things. Northeast PHP Conference is a good example of that. So behind the scenes, there's a lot of opportunities to do things organizationally and code-wise from a programming perspective. So we would love to have you get involved if you're interested in participating. So if you want to reach me, simply send an email to gene@bostonphp.org or see me afterwards. We have a very special presenter tonight. He is our organizer of Boston PHP. You've seen his face, you've seen his name many times, and he's allowed me to do this introduction, so we can turn the show now over to, give a warm welcome to Matt Murphy.
Thanks, Gene. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. This thing's on, but we'll crank it up a little bit. So welcome, everybody. Nice to see everybody. We've got a lot of newcomers. That's great. And it's nice to hear that people are hiring. And it's nice to hear that people are using Laravel, which is cool. I'm a fan. One of the most recent projects I did was written in that, so that's great. Welcome. One of the things that we talk about a lot when we talk about events to put on and things like that is one of the things that we don't really know is who our membership consists of in terms of the skill level of our membership. So I'm curious, just tonight, how many people here would consider themselves a beginner? Yeah, great. Welcome. We're happy you're here. How many people would consider themselves intermediate, somewhere in the middle? Okay, and how about expert? Okay, great. So let me just pull up my presentation here. We're going to be going back and forth between some code and some websites and the main presentation. Well, I'll tell you how this presentation came to be. On our Meetup site, which we use to generate invites and to track RSVPs and basically get the word out, there's a feature on there that allows people to submit ideas. I forget what it's called. It used to be called I have an idea. Now it's recommended. Do you know what it's called? Suggest a meetup. Okay. So somebody, I think two separate people at different times, put up suggestions about sending email. And they racked up a ton of votes. A lot of people RSVP say, I want to be a part of that. So we had the chance to plan an event here this month. I am just recently coming off a project for my company that was consulting on a project for a customer that happened to be sending, it was a project that involved sending a whole bunch of opt-in email. So the timing was right, so I jumped in and said, all right, let's do this. Well, so the idea here is we're going to talk about how to send email with PHP. But this isn't just a PHP talk. I think, in fact, you're going to find that sending email with PHP is pretty darn easy, as long as you don't use the built-in mail function, which we'll talk about. But it's pretty easy, but it's very nuanced. There's a lot of pitfalls and gotchas and just weird stuff about sending email involved. So I hope that this talk, I think the code samples that we show will make sense for beginners. I hope that they do. I think the intermediate and the expert folks will hopefully take away a decent amount with some of the nuances involved in generating the PHP, but also some of the non-PHP stuff around this. So we're going to talk about PHP's mail function. We'll talk about using third-party classes instead of working directly with the mail function and why that's a good idea. We'll also talk about interacting with third-party APIs and why you may want to do that and what the benefits are of plugging into a system, a third-party system that is built to send email. We'll talk about HTML rendering, and somebody wrote a comment on the meetup site that said something like, it's pure hell, or I forget what, if anybody's watching the comments. Is that person here? Yeah. What did you say again?
I said it was rather generous to call it difficult and nuanced. I said it was royal pain in the butt.
A royal pain in the butt, yeah. So we'll talk about some of that stuff and how to deal with that, and also how to test that, which is kind of tricky. We'll talk about avoiding spamminess of your emails, and we'll talk about some testing. So the whole idea here is that, pretty much all applications these days need to send some kind of email. At the most basic form, you might send a reset password email, or you might send a welcome email or something like that. I'm sure all of the applications that you use on a regular basis, they're constantly sending you some type of email. People call this transactional email. All right, these are emails that are built into the system to help users use it. There's also marketing email that can be built. This applies to both of those things. Okay, but we're really primarily talking about emails that people want to get. This isn't a talk on how to generate a ton of spam or anything like that. So we're talking about transactional emails or opt-in emails. I'm going to be showing some code samples, really, when we talk about PHP Mailer. I'm going to run those from the command line, okay? And I'll just kind of give you an explanation why. We're all writing web applications, right? We typically are doing things with PHP code based on the user doing something. So the most basic example is a feedback form, right? When you're talking about the email context, somebody goes to your site, they put in their name, their email, they put in a message, they click a button that sends you an email. So we're talking about that, right? There's a layer on top of just sending the email that almost always exists out there. There's some interaction from the user or something else happens in the application to trigger an email. We're not really going to get bogged down by that, okay? We're not going to build a web form to accept the feedback or anything like that. We're just going to talk about the code that's actually sending the email. Is that okay with everybody? I think that would be the more efficient way to do it. But just for kicks, we will just kind of show you this. If you're interested in figuring out how to do an actual contact form, there's this free contact form. Just put in on Google how to actually build a web interface to send an email, and you'll get a lot of stuff like this. Let's see if I can zoom in for you. Generating a form, accepting inputs, and sending that to another script, and then having a script right here that will say, okay, if the post email is set, send an email. But we're going to largely ignore that, okay? But I just want to tell you that that's out there. If you're looking for that sort of thing, you can easily find code samples for that. All right, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is PHP's built-in mail function. Does anybody use this directly in their code? Yeah. Why? Why are you using this?
Legacy.
Legacy? Okay.
I haven't replaced it yet.
Okay, Chuck, you're using it.
It works.
Yeah. And you're sending basic stuff, I imagine, right? Are you sending any attachments or anything like that?
Generally logging stuff.
Logging stuff for yourself, like this just happened or that just happened. Okay, but you in the back, you're sending attachments. Okay, that's kind of tricky with this, is not? Yeah. So I think yes.
I'm sending HTML attachments, PDF files.
Okay.
Everything.
Yeah, and you like it because you're closer to the native stuff, I imagine. Is that right? Yeah. So we're going to talk about this. I want to show you what this looks like. Sometimes in life you don't really know how good you have it until the kind of the comforts are taken away. So before we get to using third-party classes, I want to show you mail. It's very simple. We'll jump out of here and we'll pull up some actual code. All right, so we're defining our message here, right? Line 1. We're putting new lines in. The word wrap is something that is recommended for different types of clients. So it's gonna create line breaks or new lines every 70 characters, and then you build your headers manually. You're just building a header string essentially separated by new lines. So this is from Matt at VOSVI. Reply here. Xmailer, we're just setting our PHP version. That's a header that gets sent to the email client, basically what kind of email application created this. And then you call mail. So you're sending it to, sending it to bosphp@gmail.com. We're giving it a name as well. We're including the message, and we're setting the headers. That's pretty simple. If you're doing simple stuff, that's very easy to pick this up and get rolling. There are a couple challenges with this. As your email needs start to get a little bit more complex, it starts to get a little bit harder, especially when you're building headers. If you have a bunch of attachments, it's a little trickier. It's less abstracted. The other thing is you have to be running an email server on your machine. And for the most part, when you're talking about at least the Linux environment, you're running Postfix. And this is the book about Postfix. Postfix is there's a lot of well, the more, it's like anything, I guess, but you can really dig into Postfix. And running a mail server may not be something that you want to take on. But that's one thing that is required if you're going to use this. Let me show you what calling the mail function looks like when your emails get a little bit more complex. Okay, so this is what it would look like if you were going to be sending an attachment. Let me make the text bigger. Is that visible okay? Yeah, you are? Okay. So you build it in a similar way, but if you want to send an attachment, you basically have to read in the file into a very good, you've got to create a file handle, you've got to read in that content, you've got to encode it, you've got to chunk it up so that it's appropriate for sending it in an email, you've got to create a separator to separate out your attachments from the rest of the message, and you've got to build more complex headers, and then you basically call the mail function again. It gets much more complex once you want to start to send attachments. So there's a much easier way. It's not that this is a bad way to do it. We've got people who do it. It's well documented. It's not mysterious, but there's some overhead. And if you're newer to PHP, you probably find yourself debugging quite a bit more than you would if you use one of the third-party classes. Yeah, it's not all that different. I mean, you're using fopen, you're creating a file handle, you're reading contents of the file into a variable. Yeah, there are parts of this that are very similar. So bear with me here as I jump back and forth between the presentation. So the third-party classes are out there. Two of the most popular ones are PHP Mailer and SwiftMail. Just because I have more experience with it, I'm going to be showing examples of PHP Mailer. Third-party frameworks often use one or the other. Often use PHP Mailer. I think Drupal, Joomla, a few others use PHP Mailer on the back end. I think Laravel uses SwiftMailer. We'll talk about PHP Mailer. So one of the nice things about PHP Mailer is that you don't have to be running an email server on your machine. Okay? Basically, you're going to be connecting to a third-party SMTP server. How many people have heard of SMTP? Yeah, a bunch, right? Anybody who's set up a brand new phone in the last bunch of years is aware of this term SMTP server. When you go, if you get a new smartphone, you go in and you configure an email account, you're thinking about SMTP servers. So what you want to do is your email isn't going to go directly from your application out the door. It's going to go to an SMTP server and then on its way towards your recipient. So the first thing you want to do is you want to set up an email account through a third-party provider. You go buy a domain name on GoDaddy or wherever, and typically you can often get an email account for free associated with your domain, or maybe you can get one super cheap. But there are tons of email providers out there that allow you to set one up. And they'll give you access credentials. And you're basically going to use those credentials in your PHP script. So this is a screenshot from GoDaddy. And down here, you get incoming server and outgoing server information. So you'll have your username, which is often your email address, and then you'll have your password and your outgoing SMTP server. So we're going to use that in a second. I'm going to show you some code. But essentially, PHP Mailer it abstracts away a lot of the work involved. A lot of the code that you saw in the more complex example of using the mail function directly is sort of abstracted away. You can work with fewer lines of code that you actually have to write and debug. One gotcha with this is that if you're on a shared hosting account, very often shared hosting accounts will actually block SMTP traffic, outbound SMTP traffic. So that's just something to know about. So let me show you some PHP Mailer stuff, and we'll actually send some emails. Make this text bigger for you. Is that visible to everybody? Okay. All right. So we're requiring the autoloader, and then I've got my actual credentials in a separate file, just so I'm not sharing that with the presentation. So we're pulling in basically two constants, user and password from the credentials.php. So we create a new instance of PHP Mailer, and then we tell it is SMTP. So PHP Mailer doesn't need to send stuff through SMTP. If you actually are running a mail server on your machine, it can send it directly through Postfix. But you would tell it that you want to use SMTP. And this is where you include your information from your email provider. So the host, in this case, this is GoDaddy. So this is SMTP out.secureserver.net. We're telling it to use authentication. So to give the username and password, we're telling it PHP Mailer the username and the password. Again, that's pulled in from this credentials.php file. We're setting the port. That's also information that GoDaddy is telling us to use when we access it. And we're telling it to use SSL. So essentially, your PHP script is now operating like an email client. It's just like your phone sending an email out. It's going through this SMTP server. So these are the credentials that allow you to connect to it. And down here, we're actually building the email. You can see it's a fewer lines of code. So we're sending it from me here. We're also including the name. We're sending it to bosphp@gmail.com. You can optionally add an actual human non-email address name, or you can just give the email address. You can see this is commented out. You can add as many addresses as you want. You can just keep calling the add address method. You can add a reply to. These can be different. Notice, and this is one of the security issues and one of the spam issues with email. Email is a very loose protocol. The SMTP protocol is highly abusable because you can set, as you all know, you can set the from address, even though it might not be from that person. We're going to talk about that later. And we're going to talk about some of the things that have emerged to attempt to deal with that problem. But it's a very loose protocol. It's very easy to abuse the sender information. And then down here, you can tell PHP Mailer, is this an HTML email? We're setting it to true. We're giving it a subject. And one thing that's important is that we're giving an HTML body, a very simple HTML body right here. We're just building HTML tags and saying this is the HTML message body. But we're also including an alternate body, which is just plain text. That's very good practice. And one of the things that we'll talk about later is this idea of spamminess with an email. It's very good practice, even if you just believe in your heart that all of your users are going to be accessing the email with a client that can render HTML appropriately. It's still a good idea to put this plain text in, because sometimes third-party email providers that are the recipients of this will look for that. If it doesn't have the plain text, it'll tick up on the spamminess meter. So it's a good idea to include the alternate body. And then we go mail send, and we send it off, and we interpret what comes back from there. It sends off, it sends. So we'll just do this. Okay, we're going to call this from the command line. Sorry, the text is so small, but there's not a whole lot to see on this one. Anyway, so I'm just calling this PHP file with PHP and then the path to the file. All right, so that happened, that worked, okay? So I'm going to open up a browser. And I've got Gmail loaded up here. And there's one that I sent myself earlier at 6:44. Hopefully another one comes in here in a second. And we'll just see what it looks like. So this is very easy to do. We've just sent ourselves an email, and the next thing that I'm going to show you is how to add an attachment. And that's super easy to do too. But one thing to notice that we're going to talk about later is the little delay that happens. We'll do this again just for kicks. I just submitted it. It's like a second or two. One of the things that you want to think about when you're sending email from a web application is you really don't want to connect that directly to the request of the user. Let's say that you're doing something based on something that the user does. Send me an email right now. They click a button. The best thing that you can do is to queue that somehow. And there are all kinds of ways to queue things, but you basically, at a very basic form, you can just dump that into a database and run a cron job on it every once in a while to send that stuff out. You don't really want to wait. You don't want to make the user wait during the same request to click the button, have your script go out to the SMTP server, authenticate, return a response. So it's best to queue that and let that do its thing separate from returning the page back to the user. Just something to think about. Let's see if our email arrived. All right, so it did. So Boston PHP, May 29th, there's our email. We click on it, and so I've sent myself a few here, and to be honest with you, I don't use Gmail too much, but we have a Boston PHP Gmail account. So I'm like sitting up here not even really knowing how to look at this email interface, but it's in there somewhere. Yeah, there we go. All right, so that's our most, no, it's opposite. Okay, I think that's our most recent, yeah, 7:40. Okay, so that's our most recent. So let's just tweak this script a little bit and add an attachment. We'll send a couple photos with it. So I have this commented out down here. Right here you can see add an attachment, and essentially you just give it the path to a file. And we can call this as many times as we want. This is just a couple of photographs. We'll save this. We'll go back and we'll call this again. So one nice thing that PHP Mailer does for you, and we've got this set up in two different ways. As you can see, we're adding an additional parameter to this method call, where you can actually give the file a name other than whatever it exists as on your own system. So you just might not want, maybe you have a file that you send users all the time and you want to change the name on a case-by-case basis, or you just don't want it to be the same as what it is on your machine. You can change it there. All right, so there we go. And if we hover here, we see that this one says, I don't know if you can see it or not, but this has the new name that we gave it, and this has the name that was that existed on our system. Any questions about PHP Mailer, how to call it, that kind of thing?
I have a question.
Gene.
So sometimes, like when you send out through a third party or through a different kind of website, you send an email, like through Boston PHP Meetup. The Meetup site allows us to generate emails to the whole group or to a subset. And it takes a while for those emails to actually arrive sometimes.
Yeah.
Is that because they're probably being queued in the background and there's a cron job that goes periodically and sends them out? Is that one of the reasons for the delay?
Yeah, definitely, it's got to be.
Okay.
And, you think of the number of emails that Meetup is blasting out every day.
Yeah.
It's got to be staggering. So they are 100%, they're queuing them in some way, right? We've got 3,000 members. If you hit that button and this was calling out 3,000 times, or who knows what, that would just be awful for the user.
Yeah.
So that queues them, probably just throws in a database, and then there's some process that's running in the background to send those out. There's also some benefits to that delay from the standpoint of spamminess. Rate limiting that sending is a good thing. So spam detection is really complex, right? Email providers are coming up with all kinds of ways to analyze email to detect if something's spam or not. And an enormous amount of email coming from one system all at once is a red flag.
Yep.
So when we're talking about the APIs, that's one of the features that they have. They have automatic rate limiting. They actually do it on purpose to kind of stagger these things. So there's no doubt Meetup is doing that to some degree. Oh, two right in line. You in front first.
You're showing using it with an external SMTP server. If you have a mail server running already on your website, you use this with your own local mail server?
You can. Yeah, PHP Mailer will work just fine. In fact, we have a system that does that. So yeah, it'll work just fine. It'll send through postfix or what you have running. Yeah.
If you have a list, you actually have to process the list and send it each individually, or just send the list to each people.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if you have to build a loop within your own script, or if you can say pass if you can pass an array. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
And if you could repeat the question.
Oh yeah, good idea. Okay. Did everybody hear that one? I'll do that from now on. In the back.
Is PHP Mailer a script or is it a service?
It's a third-party class. So it's an open source class. You can go to GitHub site. Actually, you can go to their GitHub page. Let me just pull it up here. Yeah. So you can go download it. You'll download a zip file or whatever you want. You can uncompress it. You'll have a folder there with all the files that are required to run it. And it lives on your machine. It's installed. It's on your machine. You don't have to. It's not like an API where there's a separate service that we have to make a network connection. It becomes part of your application.
But this is not transactional. It's like the API external services.
Well, the way that I use that term, the question, did anybody hear that question? Yeah. So is this transactional email? The way that I'm using that word is not really a technical term. I'm using it from the standpoint of transactional email is often thought of as the emails that are involved in a web application's kind of everyday behavior or use to interact with it. Send them a forgot password link, send them a link about something that happened on the application that they might be interested in, like Facebook says, 2 people liked your photograph. That would be considered transactional email versus marketing email where you have a list and you're, kind of blasting things out to this list of subscribers. Does that make sense? Okay.
I was just going to add that one of the things that we do is we have programs that run in the background, and if something should fail, we'll send out an email. That would be transactional.
Yeah, I would consider that. The question is, more of a statement and a question. Yeah. One use of email in web applications very often is for developers to just write in little bits of code in their applications to email them when something happens. I do that all the time. I bet a lot of you do that. Your users don't get these emails, but you as a developer might want to know when something happens. So yeah, I think I'd consider that transactional email. Yes.
So does PHP Mailer automatically try to do rate limiting, or is that is it parameterized to do that, or do you have to put that on yourself?
Yeah, the question is, will PHP Mailer do rate limiting for you? Not that I know of.
Okay.
I think PHP Mailer will send things out as fast as your processor will allow it to churn through a loop if you have a whole list of people. I don't know of any rate limiting built into PHP Mailer, but I could be wrong about that.
It's a server function anyway, so it wouldn't do that. The server does that. Right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
They would have
Yes.
to do that for phone job. One layer. Just phone job.
Yeah, you basically queue it up and say, okay, every 10 minutes, say, give me 5 off of the stack and send out 5 or whatever. You could easily write that yourself.
Sure, I was just,
Yeah.
in fact, I was concerned that it might do that.
Yeah, I don't think it has anything like that going on. Yes?
Yeah, I just want to answer the you have a bunch of people want to send to 20 easy, you can line on as a string and separate them with the comma. And it just as a receipt in the stack. It will automatically,
You're saying if you want to send it to a whole bunch of people, basically with one email, put them all in the two, basically as a two property. Yeah, yeah. BCC, right? Otherwise, they all see each other.
Except that most servers limit the number of twos you can put in, because that's what spammers used to do, right? They can put 1,000 guys in 2 fields.
Yeah.
And then they got hip to that, so no, you can't put like a whole lot of people in each service has a different number, right?
Yeah.
But there is a number that you'll hit where they go, no, you can't.
Yeah.
It's that many.
Yeah.
That spam, infection. 10, sure.
Yeah.
It's up
10,000.
big.
Yeah. That's a good point. John here, Al, he said that most, a lot of the servers that are sending these out will max out at a certain number of recipients. Yes. Yeah, not that I know of. You have to build that yourself. There are ways to do that. Third-party APIs are great at that. So we'll talk about that a little bit. That's probably one of the biggest reasons to use a third-party service to send your email through, because they've built a whole infrastructure to detect that. The way that email opens are actually perceived on the server end is that you embed a tiny little, almost invisible image at a specific URL. And each email that receives that gets a unique identifier in that URL. And if the person loads images in their email client, it kicks back to the server, this open. So you could build that. You could totally build that into your own application. But third-party providers are really good at that. That's one of the best things that they do when you use one of those services.
But again, at the end of the day, all about what I do with my email. I don't show pictures.
Correct.
You are a preview. Nobody can know that I read that email. What they're selling you out there in those third parties, it's all supposedly working.
Exactly.
If you don't want to, there's no way they can figure out if you read it, or whatever you do.
Right. The only way you get any information if the person turns on the viewing of images for that particular email. And more email clients across the board are by default turning off image display. So as long as the viewer doesn't open up those images and doesn't click on anything, you don't see anything. So that's definitely a consideration. We'll talk about that a little bit more and how that affects some of the design considerations too. All right, we'll keep moving. Bear with me here. I'm just having trouble with my mouse. So if you're using a framework, chances are that your framework is already dealing with all of this stuff very easily for you. It has ways for you to deal with this. And very often they're using PHP Mailer or a Swift Mailer. I mentioned earlier that I think Laravel uses Swift Mailer. I think Drupal and Joomla are using PHP Mailer and a few others. So again, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel on this stuff. If somebody's done a good job at writing some code that does this job well, you might as well use that. But if you're using a framework, chances are it's already built in. I'll just show you what Laravel does before we move on. So this is Laravel's documentation page, and they have a basic usage for sending an email, and it's pretty simple. Laravel is an MVC framework, so it consists of views, where basically you separate your presentation from your application logic, and these views basically exist as files. So you can have a file that generally looks like HTML, but with some template tags mixed in there. So you basically point one of your template files at it. This is what this emails.welcome is, and you pass whatever data you want to go in there, and then you just call this command here, and it'll send an email. It's very easy to send attachments. I don't know how other frameworks do this, but I think any framework out there is going to make your life really easy when it comes to sending email. So if you're using a framework, you don't even have to look at PHP May or any other third-party classes. Chances are it's built in. So we mentioned this already, but you will likely want to queue email sending in some way. Your framework might have some features built into it that allow you to queue tasks. You could build it yourself. You could have a table of email messages, and whenever that user does that action or whenever that thing takes place where you send an email, you put all that into a database. You know, one field could be the recipient, other field is the subject, other field is the body, other field is the text, and then you set up a cron job. And if any of you aren't familiar with a cron job, they're basically repetitive tasks that you can set up to run at any given interval of time. So you can put all of these messages in a database, and you can say, okay, every 5 minutes, clear out the queue, or every 5 minutes, pull 10 out of the database and send them. And you can have another field in the database that you call sent. It could be a Boolean, and when it's sent, it just checks that off as sent. It sets that value to sent. So if you called that, you could say, okay, give me the most recent 10 messages that haven't been sent yet. So that's one way to queue at a very basic level if you want to build it by hand. So we'll talk about third-party APIs. You get a lot of functionality from this. There are a bunch of players in this space right now. There's a company called SendGrid. I'll just go through their websites here. I've got them up for you here. There's a company called Mandrill, or a service called Mandrill. This is owned by MailChimp. So obviously MailChimp is pretty good at sending emails, tracking emails, and their infrastructure is very robust. So they offer a service where MailChimp is a service that allows you to design emails. There's all these layers that you might not need as a developer. If you just want the delivery functionality they've built, you can use Mandrill. There's SendGrid, which is another one that a lot of big brands use. It seems like they've got a lot of large clients. Amazon has a service they call Amazon SES, Simple Email Service. Rackspace has a service they call Mailgun. This is the service that I have experience with. So the examples that I'm going to show you are going to be primarily Mailgun examples, only because I use that, and only because we use Rackspace to do our hosting. And you get a really good deal when you use Rackspace to do the hosting, and you've been happy with them. So the examples that I'm going to show you are Mailgun examples. So before we actually look at some code, so what are the benefits of using a third-party service like this through your API? Well, for one, you're making HTTP requests or SMTP connections. So I mentioned earlier that if you're on a shared hosting environment, sometimes SMTP connections are blocked from shared hosting accounts, whereas HTTP connections are typically allowed to external systems. Most of these providers, most of these services will actually allow you to interact with their system either way. You can basically build an email message and send it via SMTP with PHP Mailer and send it off to Mailgun and have it do the delivery for you. Or you can just make a regular API call. I'll show you some code. It's super easy. So a lot of abstraction of complexity, right? You're basically buying time. you're buying developer time by using an API. They've tested, they've debugged, they've built a ton of infrastructure, but it comes at a price. You pay them money. Usually it has to do with the number of emails that you send. Theoretically, they maintain clean IP addresses. So when you're talking about email deliverability and stuff actually getting through, if you're sending email from a shared environment or some sort of if you're sending it from a not only just a static IP, but also IPs in certain ranges, you might get into issues with the reputation of your IP address. So theoretically, these third-party systems, these services, are out there making sure that their IP addresses aren't on blacklists to keep that problem solved for its users. That's not 100% guaranteed, and that's constant ongoing work that they have to do to keep those things clean. Probably the biggest thing, or one of the biggest features that they offer is this ability that we mentioned earlier, the ability to track open rates, click rates, bounce rates, all kinds of data. So essentially, you can get a ton of data back. You can get geographic data about where people are when they're opening emails, email clients, what they're using, what browser they're using. So if you really want to dig into data, again, you can build all this stuff yourself, but these third-party services really help. And again, that is only if people have their images turned on. That's the only way you get any of that stuff, or if they click on something. Otherwise, any of these systems are blind. There's no way to know anything if people aren't loading images or clicking on things. Another really important thing is that a lot of these third-party APIs, a lot of these third-party systems, these delivery systems have built a very robust unsubscribe and complaint handling functionality. And they actually act as a secondary backstop to your own system. For example, if somebody unsubscribes, these systems won't allow you to send them another email unless you go in there and manually kind of undo it. If somebody complains, there's a loopback feature through ISPs that'll come back, and that's taken a bit more seriously. That's super important. If you're going to be sending emails, you absolutely have to handle unsubscribes and complaints properly. You just have to. You really don't want to send anything to somebody who has unsubscribed or complains. Let me just quickly explain the difference between unsubscribe and complaint. If you're sending email to your users or your subscribers, let's say you have a list of customers who want to hear about your stuff all the time. Sometimes people think, well, I'm going to hide the unsubscribe link. That's a really bad idea. You want that unsubscribe link to be way easier to click and to find than the button that says this is spam. Because that button that says this is spam actually kicks back to the internet service provider or the recipient, and if you get enough of those, your emails are going to stop getting through. Whereas an unsubscribe has really no negative effect on your domain's reputation, your IP's reputation. But if recipients start complaining complaining that your emails are spam, you're in trouble. So knowing that code is functioning perfectly because you're paying a third-party provider to build it and test it and make sure it's running all the time, I think that alone tends to be worth it depending on your email volume. So let me show you what the code looks like. Yes?
Doesn't this also have, you go back to your transactional versus just pushing data out. Most things that are transactional, people are wanting to get anyway.
Yeah, you would hope, right?
Password resets that don't go through are not real useful.
What is that?
Password resets that don't go through are.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why a lot of systems allow you to set preferences on how you can receive stuff. They just don't want people clicking complaints. And one thing is that people just don't know. Some people don't know the difference between a complaint and an unsubscribe. They might think it's the same thing. They might think complaint is an unsubscribe. So that's why you want to make your unsubscribe link super obvious. We got a little bit further down the road there, kind of into some of the design best practices. But let me show you some code to make an API call with PHP. All right, so again, this is Mailgun. display is not participating here. Can you all see that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's pretty easy. You basically create a new instance of Mailgun, you pass it a key. This isn't my key, this is just an example key. So, and then you tell it the domain. Mailgun allows you to set up several different domains. If you have a lot of systems that are using one Mailgun account, you can have different domains set up on the system. And then you basically just make the call. You're collecting the result, and you're calling the send message method. You're passing it the domain, and then you're just passing it a simple array. So this is the from email address, this is who it's going to, this is the subject, and this is the text. And that's it. The response tells you it got queued, it sends back JSON, gives you an ID. You can get a little bit more complex, but it doesn't get crazy. Very similar up at the top, and then you can add, you can copy folks, you can blind copy email addresses. Note down here that functionality that I mentioned earlier, the ability to send 2 versions of your email, and that's something you should always do. There's a plain text version, and then there's the HTML version. So it's highly recommended that you always send both, and then they're adding an attachment here. So that's an API call. These APIs are RESTful APIs. They're not tied to a particular language like PHP or Ruby or anything like that. They're accessible through HTTP methods like GET and POST and that kind of stuff. And if you want to write your own code to interact with those, you totally can. You can use something called curl. Who here has heard of curl? Yeah, curl generates HTTP requests. But again, a lot of times people don't want to do that. They don't want to write their own requests with curl. So all of these providers that I mentioned also have written and tested their own wrapper, basically a PHP wrapper. So you don't have to make these HTTP requests directly. You can download their PHP wrapper, and you can write much simpler PHP. That's what we're talking about.
Is it required to verify from address or put in whatever you want?
We'll talk a little bit about that later. You can put in whatever you want, but they tell you very clearly that that's a bad idea. They have pretty good support for email authentication using DNS records. So we'll talk a little bit about that. There are ways, see, the question was, for those of you who didn't hear it, was does Mailgun allow you to put in whatever from address you want? And the answer is yes, it does. And we talked earlier about the challenges with just how email was built. Email was built in a way that's highly, it's very easy to take advantage of. It's very easy to abuse email. That's what's happening, right? 80% of emails in the world are spam. One of the ways that, some of the methods that people have come up with to fight that is there are technologies. One's called SPF, Sender Policy Framework, and what's called DKIM, Domain Key Identifier, and Identified Mail. So what you do is you actually create a DNS record on your domain. You go to your domain's DNS records. You create a DNS record, and you have a public key on there that's published to the world. And then you include that key. This is in the case of DKIM. You include the string of characters in the email that gets sent. So when that goes to gets to your recipient's email service provider, they can read that string of characters and then actually make a request to the DNS server and pull back your DNS record. And if they match, it considers that validated. Your domain is giving permission to send email on its behalf. So we're going to get to that a little bit later, but Mailgun, I'm sure these other services support that very well and very easily. But yeah, they'll let you do anything, but they'll tell you that it's a bad idea. All right, let's keep moving here. Sorry. So we saw some sample API code. I'm just going to talk quickly about webhooks, because this is one of the really neat features. So let's just say that you wanted to build your own MailChimp. Who here has used MailChimp or Constant Contact or something like that? All right, so a bunch of people have. One of the really cool things about that, I think probably the feature that everybody looks at and the reason why most people use it, is that you send out an email campaign and then you can just like watch. And you can keep hitting refresh. And you can see 5 people open my email, 10 people, 20 people. Then you can see who opened your email. And again, it's all if they show the images. That's the information to get. If you're sending transactional emails for your web application, maybe you want to know how many people are opening your emails and if they're clicking, and if they're clicking, what are they clicking on? So what webhooks allow you to do is basically they allow the third-party system, in my case it's Mailgun, to create an HTTP post to my system, to your system. And then it sends back that information constantly, whenever it has something to tell your application. So there are really 2 ways to interact with an API. You can make a request of the API and say, okay, give me all the people who clicked in the last 5 minutes. Or you can set up a webhook, and that third-party API will just keep pinging this information back to you because you've exposed a resource, you've exposed typically a script, or in the case of an MVC, you've exposed a controller or something like that will accept this data. And it's just a post. It's like somebody's on your own site and clicks submit to sign up for something. That data comes back to some PHP code that you've written as an HTTP post, right? You get it as post data. Same thing with a webhook. You're basically supporting some functionality on your end to allow the third-party system to do an HTTP post and dump you some data. There are ways to secure it. There are ways to sign on both sides so that, obviously they're not going to be putting in a username and password every time. So there are ways to secure it, which we won't go into. But I just want to show you some of the information that you can get back. So again, this is Mailgun, and I don't work for Mailgun or anything like that. I'm pitching them a lot, but it's only because I'm very familiar with it. This is the data that they'll give you every time somebody opens something. And this is every time somebody opens something. So if you have an application that's interacting with one of these systems and you're doing a decent amount of activity, you'll get thousands of these a day. Your application will just be interpreting these webhooks all the time. So in the case of opens, you get what it's calling the event. You're getting the recipient, the email address who opened it, the domain that sent the original message, the IP address that it originated from, the country code. They're doing some voodoo with the IP address to get country code, region, city, the user agent of whatever it is, either it's a browser, maybe it's a desktop application, the device type, whether it's mobile or desktop, the client name, the operating system. You can give custom variables, like let's say you want to track on a message, my advanced message basis, what's going on here. So it's pretty neat. You can get all kinds of data back about your emails that are going out. And again, only if somebody has images turned on or if they click on something will you get this. But it is really neat to be able to, it's sort of crazy when you show it to somebody who hasn't, you can get some really interesting information that otherwise it's just, you never see. It's kind of neat to see who's clicking and opening emails. Questions so far? In the back there.
Where I am is kind of figuring out how to interact with my basic kind of web app to the APIs. Is there a good place to kind of get caught up on how to do that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, just the idea of interacting with an API in general.
Well, specifically a mail-based API. I mean, I've checked out Mandrill's documentation. Some of it's still a little over my head.
Yeah.
So for some reason, it's not clicking when I look at it, and I feel like there's a piece missing that I don't.
Yeah. So the question is, how do you learn how to interact with an API, right? It's just in a general sense. How do you do that? I don't know. I mean, you might want to see. Obviously, the documentation isn't clicking for you. You might want to look at another API. Google has a ton of APIs that a lot of people use, just to get a sense for what's really happening here. Any other suggestions from people?
Did you say you're not getting the opens from the service provider?
No, it's that I don't understand it.
I use Mandrill, and
it's actually a little tricky because they shoot you to GitHub for these wrappers for the functionality. They actually have for PHP functionality, but it's a little bit. I remember finding it after I was using a GitHub wrapper that made it really choose to use the interface. But it's on there somewhere. You have to dig a little. When I found them, like, this is pretty straightforward. I was gonna have this when I started.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the big choices when you're deciding on any technology, whether it's a framework or an API, is how much you like their documentation. You know, so you might just want to shop around and just look at documentation and see if anything clicks for you better.
There's almost always an example. If you can get the example to work, then you know that the fundamentals, you know, are in place. 'Cause
yeah.
The hard thing is to separate whether it's how you connect to the something remotely that's a problem, or whether it's you know, your environment is wrong, or whether what you're trying to ask it to do is wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions before we? Yes, Mark.
Anybody know any black art to figure out if it's the original recipient or is it forward to another party who subsequently opened it? I mean, the devices are confusing.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a really good question because they're embedding some numerical identifiers, right? They're embedding some strings to track this, and theoretically, if you send it to somebody else, like let's say somebody forwards it on, that's going to register as an open for the original recipient.
Right.
Because it's the same identifier. But you probably could do some voodoo with interpreting IP addresses and things like that, and you could deduce, okay, this is a different person because they're an IP address that appears to be a different geographical location. I don't know of any directly supported features like that in Mailgun, at least, where they're doing that kind of analysis for you.
So what I see from this example of Mailgun is when you say you click on it, or not download the images, what you're doing is you're actually doing a pull request, and that information is actually being sent saved by the Mailgun somewhere, and then passes that stuff back to you, except for your customer.
Yeah, the question was that basically they're doing an HTTP request. It's a GET request versus a POST. So the email client of the recipient is doing a GET request on this image that is probably invisible in the, it's usually a 1 pixel by 1 pixel something. They're doing a GET request on it, and then by doing that GET request, a whole bunch of information is collected by the web server on that side.
The second thing I would suggest is that if you're going to do something like this, what you might want to do is set up a PHP web service that just sits around and just collects this information.
Absolutely.
Rather than have an application looking at this stuff coming back.
Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, you know, here's what we did on a different type of project. We set up a page, a web service. It really was a web service where we were collecting images, and based upon the request that you were doing through the post or GET, we would send the type of request that you wanted to look at, and that ended up being a web service for us because we weren't hitting multiple pages. We would always hit the same API, or in this case, HTTP, URL, I'm sorry, URL. And we would collect information from that. So rather than having an application just call out your email and get all the stuff, what you should do is tell them to go to another URL, let it collect the information, and then you occasionally, with something, look at the information.
Okay. I'm not totally following you, but that's okay. I've got 1,000 things I'm thinking about. I'll think about my next slide, so bear with me. We can talk about it later, or maybe talk about it in the Q&A. So we'll keep moving here. We talked about webhooks. Let's talk about validating your email, validating email addresses. So somewhere along the way, it's good practice to make sure that you're sending to actual email addresses, right? Who knows where this is going to be? Maybe there's a user that's triggering some actions on your application. There are some things built into PHP, some functions that are built into PHP that'll help you with that. Bear with me 1 second. So one of them is filter bar. This allows you to do all kinds of predefined filters. And one of them is to match the syntax of an email address, which can actually be pretty complex. Even if you're good at regular expressions, detecting emails can have quite a bit of variation in them. So this this function, filter bar, is pretty good. It allows you to skip having to write your own regular expressions. And this function, check DNSRR, is kind of cool. This is one of those like little known functions in PHP. But it'll actually check the existence of a DNS record. It'll tell you true or false and whether it actually exists or not. So your first check, it'll, first you would kind of split apart the email, get the domain, and then you would pass it to check DNSRR and say, check if this domain has an MX record. Just another additional layer of like, okay, this is a valid email address, but is this an actual domain? And does it actually have an MX record where it's receiving email? So you might want to do something like that. APIs also have this functionality built into it. I'll just show you. So that's the check DNSRR function on the PHP site. And Mailgun also has email validation built into it. One cool thing about doing this through a third-party API is that it'll actually kick back a did you mean such and such, which is really hard to implement on your own. Like, you put in something into Amazon, right? It says, did you actually mean this? Third-party APIs are smart enough and robust enough to do that. The reason why that might be handy is if you have a form that the user is actually filling out, maybe they don't mean to give you the wrong email address. Maybe they just typed it in wrong, and you can tie it to their API with some AJAX, and they can put something in, and that you can make that call and say, actually, did you mean this? And they say, oh yeah, made a typo, let me fix it. So that's a cool thing. And that's something that would be pretty hard to build on your own. All right, now let's talk about email rendering. So this is the pain in the ass that was discussed earlier. Was that the term? I think it was. Royal pain in the ass. So we're going to talk a little bit about this. So you've got to go back in time when you're talking about writing HTML for email. Anything you've learned in the last 15 years about separating presentation from content and data and all that stuff, anything with anything having to do remotely with, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you've got to use tables, unfortunately. Tables, you've got to do all of your layout with tables. All of it. It's disgusting to look at. It's awful. People are always talking about this is just, it's getting emails to render properly in email clients is awful. I think once you accept the fact that it's a whole different ballgame, you can be very successful at it. You got to use tables for all layout. All of your CSS has to be in line. There's no harm in putting your CSS up at the top between style tags. It's not going to harm anything, but very often it'll be ignored. Gmail will ignore it, surprisingly. Modern applications will ignore it. All of your CSS has to be in line. So one thing that people think is, well, I'm just going to sidestep that. I'm just going to do an image. I'm just going to put one image in an HTML page, and I'm going to do all my layout in an image. Let's say I don't have any dynamic content I've got to put in there. I'm just going to send one giant image. You don't want to do that. Number one, a lot of people have images off by default. But in addition to that, when third-party systems are detecting, trying to determine whether something is spam or not, they can't see the content of the image. These systems aren't good at interpreting content of images, and they think that if you're putting a giant image there instead of text, you're probably trying to get around a spam filter. So there's this percentage of image area versus text area that is really considered by spam filters. So you don't want to do that. So take the time, write the HTML. set your background color on your parent table, not on the body element. One reason for that is that when users click reply, if your body background is like say dark blue and you're using black text, they'll start typing on a dark blue background. Very often, email applications will preserve that body background, and when you start typing, they won't be able to see their text. This is one of these small nuances. Set widths of each table cell instead of the table itself. So you've got to nest tables like crazy in order to do this successfully. It's not a pleasant experience, but you're going to have tables within tables, but it's what you've got to do to make these things render reliable. It's good practice to design pretty small. You know, these days nobody's really designing web pages for 600 pixels wide. Again, that's like 1999, but it's good practice to stay somewhere around there. There are automated tools. There's a tool called Premailer, which will take an HTML file with CSS that's not inline, and will spit out inline CSS, which is kind of neat. Use target blank for any links that you create, because if somebody's reading something in a web application and you take them out of that web application, that's not a very pleasant experience. So you can open this in, you know, depending on how their defaults are, they might open in a new tab or a new window. Many users will have images off by default, so factor that into your design. Use alt tags on all of your images so that people can see what it is that they're not seeing, and maybe, you know, maybe they'll click on it based on what they're seeing there. It's good practice to always include height and width on all of your image elements, just to keep the rendering very tight. You want to avoid PNG files because it's spotty support. We'll get to that in a second. So let me just show you kind of the beginning of what a typical HTML might actually look like. We're not going to go through it through the whole thing, but I just want you to see what it looks like. So this is a blade template file used for Laravel. One cool thing about Laravel is you can just pass it a file which is mostly HTML with some dynamic content mixed in there, and it'll replace, you know, your relevant data within tags. But just to give you a sense, so here's our body element. You can see what this looks like here. Our style's in line there. Our parent table is here. So we're setting that as at 100% because we want that to essentially be the background. And that's where we're setting the background color. We're setting it on there. And then in the table, just, then we're doing another nested table here where we're basically, that's where we're enforcing the 600 pixel width. So this is not a fun process. I would recommend outsourcing this. So when we were doing this recently, we found some pretty cool companies that you just send them a file for pretty, you know, fairly inexpensively. They'll take your design and they'll give you HTML code that'll render spot on across all kinds of devices. And you look at the stuff, you look at the HTML, and it just looks awful. It's just tables within tables, and it's just craziness. But that's what they do all day, every day. There's a company called Email Monks. Let me pull, see if they're up here. Yeah, Email Monks. So for $45, you can send them a file. It can be a Photoshop file or like really any image file, and they'll convert that to HTML rendering. They'll split up the images for you. It's definitely worth the money. You know, instead of ripping your hair out trying to figure this out, they've been pretty good for us. All right. We're almost to the end here, so we're going to talk a little bit about spamminess. These spam filters are intentionally mysterious, right? Spam filters don't want to give you all the criteria that they use to to detect spam. Otherwise, they wouldn't be effective. But there are some known things that you want to keep in mind. Your DNS settings. So we were talking about this earlier. This whole idea that email is a SMTP is a protocol that's very easy to abuse. You can set the from field to basically whatever you want and send it off. What these authentication methods attempt to do is they attempt to use the DNS system as a validator, an authenticator. So basically, you have a text, a DNS record that contains a string of text. In the case of DKIM, whenever you send an email out, it also contains that string, and it basically allows the recipient's email system to say, okay, this is verified that this came from this domain. So you should definitely do that. That's outside of the scope of this talk, but if you're going to be sending email on a regular basis to a large number of users, set that up. And there are a few different technologies out there. SPF stands for Sender Policy Framework. DKIM, Sender ID is another one that has emerged. That image area to text ratio thing is real. You don't want to send giant text. Oh, Chuck.
Question on that. You used, let's say something like PHP Mailer used like a GoDaddy SMTP. That going to take care of some of the first.
PHP Mailer has support for DKIM, so you can send that string along as a header with your email. So PHP Mailer will support that. SPF exists, I believe it exists entirely just on the domain. So when the receiving mail system calls the DNS records for your domain, it'll kick back other domains that it's authorized to send on behalf of.
From at.
Yeah. Yeah. I could be wrong about that, but I think SPF exists entirely on the DNS system.
I think you would have trouble because if your sending email is market at joe.com, you have to go to joe.com and say that you're going to be relaying off of GoDaddy's server, I believe, in your domain record.
I don't know exactly. I don't know. We have to research it a bit.
Yeah, that's just put the IP address in for the domain name, and that may move around on your GoDaddy. Maybe playing off a bunch of different IPs and servers, so you can have trouble moving email off of something like that in volume.
Image area to text ratio, that's a real thing, so be careful about that. You don't want to solve your layout problems with images. Punctuation, click here, exclamation points, all caps, bad idea. Include both text and HTML versions. We talked a little bit about that. If you're including links, it's a good idea to have those links link to the same domain that's sending the email. Misspellings are an issue, all caps. The domain, the from, return path, and the sending domain should all match. Test in the subject line is an almost guaranteed way not to have your email delivered. So there are testing services out there. So this problem of email rendering and spam detection and all that stuff, it's not a new problem. There are services that have emerged to help you solve this problem. There's a company called Witness. Let me just get to my browser tabs here so I can tell you what this looks like. Yeah, so there's a company called Witness. There's also a company called Email on Acid. Email on Acid is something that I've used, and they're pretty good. So I don't know how they do it, but it seems like they just have a ton of machines running in all different kinds of environments and all different configurations, different browsers, different operating systems, and then they take screenshots of your email landing in all those environments. And you can very quickly see on one page where your design is falling apart or not falling apart. So you can view a sample of what these reports look like here on their website. So they basically give you an email address, and then you send to that email address. And it'll detect, so let me just click on, so this is AOL running in Firefox on Windows machine.
So this is geared largely for the HTML rendering?
Correct. They do two things. They do HTML rendering and also spamminess detection. And that's kind of murky. The spamminess thing is murky. To be honest with you, it's not it'll tell you if you have huge problems, but that's still somewhat mysterious. This is Outlook.com running in Chrome on a Windows machine. So it's neat. If you're doing anything like that, if you're doing this on behalf of a client, let's say somebody's paying you to do this work for them, this is a great way to go to your client and say, look, here's what we know about what we're doing, and involve them in the process a little bit. And there are others out there that emerge that I don't know about. All right, we'll just talk a little bit about some kind of final best practices, and then we've got a little bit of time for Q&A. We talked about this. Allow users to unsubscribe easily or change their preferences. You know, if you're sending transactional email about stuff that's going on within your application, it's really good to allow your users to decide how they want to receive that email and to stop that email. You just don't want them to click on that "this is spam" button, because that has big effects. Unsubscribes are always better than complaints. If you're working with a client who's paying you for this kind of work, very often they'll tell you, well, we don't want people to unsubscribe. Let's make that very small, and it's your job to convince them that no, unsubscribes are actually good in the overall scheme of things, because those are people who won't be complaining. Only send to people who have asked to be sent email from you. That might sound obvious. A lot of people recommend a double opt-in, where somebody asks to receive email, and then you send them another email, and you say, you've asked to receive email. This is what we're planning on doing. We're planning on sending email. Just tell us that this is how you understand it, and this is what you want us to do. That's called double opt-in. People often recommend using different domains for your company email versus your transactional email, like Facebook. I think it uses Facebook May, everything comes from there. I don't know what employees of Facebook use. I assume it's Facebook. But there are some benefits to separating those two things to keep those reputations separate. You should also publish all your contact info in your domain's whois record. You have the ability to set up a domain in a way that's private, so people don't know who owns the domain. That's a red flag for spam filters. So you should fill out your whois record and have accurate information. Don't purchase a list and send an email to it. Obviously, that's a bad idea. Double opt-in and send HTML and text emails. There's a decent book that's out there in the world. I don't know. Well, one of the interesting things about books about HTML email is that if it's several years old, you're not at a disadvantage because of what we're talking about. This one is called Create Stunning HTML Emails. I think it's an O'Reilly book or somewhere in there, but we actually gave this away, I think, at Northeast PHP. But there's a lot of good stuff out there. It's not, once you figure out what, from the rendering standpoint, once you figure out what you're going to do, it can become a sane process. But I hope that I've shed some light on some of the nuances around doing all this, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Gene?
So we have an online viewer who would like to know if the slides and the code will be available for them to look at afterward.
Absolutely not. You have to show up. Yeah. The slides, I can get them up to SlideShare, no problem.
Okay.
And what was the other thing?
And we have 2 books to give away.
Yes, we do.
So Matt's going to come up with the logistics on how best to do that.
On the fly here?
On the fly. Pressure's on.
Oh, cool. Okay. Oh, your new book is out.
There you go.
Nice.
These are for beginners, so I know you asked how many people were beginners, so.
Okay.
Thanks, sure.
Wow, a lot of pressure now. Other than just throwing them into the audience, I don't have any ideas right now, but maybe something will come to me. In the back.
Did you have sample code for Mailgun?
I just went to the documentation pages and showed it from there. That's the best way to do it. I didn't write any sample code. Yeah. Okay, the question is numbers for the image area to text ratio. I don't. Yeah, unfortunately I don't. But like just in practice, so email on acid has the ability to display your email rendered across all those different environments. It also gives you some kind of spam scores across different receiving email systems. And when we run tests, if the image area ratio is around half, it starts half of like just sheer surface area of screen, it definitely starts complaining. Yeah. Yes.
So for layout, you said divs are no good. Is that because clients ignore the CSS or
Yeah.
multiple devices?
Yeah, the question is why are divs no good? I don't have a good answer for you on why that is. I don't know why. I don't know why email clients are so far behind or so far away from standards. I just don't know.
Lowest common denominator. Right?
Yeah.
So usually, which is actually Outlook, has an ancient HTML renderer, and
yeah.
it can't do modern stuff. So you have to code to the lowest common denominator to work across all devices, right?
Yeah.
So you know you can do much nicer things on newer things. You can't guarantee. That's why the service is so helpful. And people with old stuff, right? You got a Palm Pilot, somebody's still using it, right? Gotta work it.
Yeah, but certain systems are, you look at it and you say, this has got to be a deliberate choice. On some level, it's just weird. It's just weird how little support certain environments offer for rendering. It's odd. I don't. Yeah, but yeah, you as the developer have to code to the lowest common denominator. Whoever might possibly get that email, you got to figure, let's try and get this thing to display for everybody. In the back, way in the back.
My comment on that is I could not agree with you stronger to just outsource that. Don't worry about this. I promise you I've spent hours and hours and hours, and that is the best $50 you'll ever spend. Ship that out, 24 hours later it's back and it works. I promise you.
Seems like tools in order.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. For me, personally, the knowledge of how to write nested tables for HTML doesn't get my brain any further down the road in life, right? I agree with you totally. It's just like, you get it back and it works. Yeah. John.
Is the clients always handle the HTML and text separation the same? I mean, where's the point where it's clear, like in your code, you had HTML that had a different message than the text message. I mean,
yeah.
Was that expected, or does it ever end up duplicated, or is it universal the way it actually makes it work?
So the question is I think the question is how do email clients, how do email applications deal with rendering that HTML version of the email versus the text version, and are there nuances around that, or do they ever display both, that kind of thing? From my experience, what I've seen is that email clients that are capable of rendering HTML will almost make it hard for the user to see the text version. If you're using Apple Mail, for example, it'll show you, with the HTML version by default, and in order to see the text version, I think you have to view headers. You have to look at the raw headers. So that's the only way I know of seeing that. In Gmail, in preparation for this, I couldn't even get to the text version. So I don't know. I mean, I know that email clients who can't render the HTML will render the text, but I don't know any specific cases of weirdness where certain environments will display both or anything like that. Yeah, clients that can render the HTML, I've never seen them also render the text. It's just kind of buried in there.
It's usually a preference setting or something like that in the email client.
Yeah, I would imagine. I've never looked at it too hard though.
Yeah, just figured it was stripping out all the HTML out of whatever was in there when I said view as text. I thought it was just getting rid of the HTML. But
I don't know.
You're saying it might actually go and find the text.
It might, yeah.
It works as a if then else.
Right.
So you will only see the one or not. Many clients will allow you to fit and check and say, give me the text, or please give me the HTML. But if you see both at the same time, something will be bad.
Yeah. Way in the back.
I just wondered, are there any services or APIs, similar to sending emails, but send to text, so like,
Yeah.
to mobile phone.
Yeah, there are. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but there are. From what I've heard, it's really hard to set that up on your own. It costs a bunch of money to actually go out and become one of those senders. But there are definitely APIs that allow you to do that. Twilio? Yeah. You can actually fake it. If you, so all these mobile companies, Verizon, AT&T, if you really want to get something to a text number, you know their number, you know their provider, you can fake it. All of these, we do that actually internally in my company for our team members. We want to send them text messages at certain times. We're not set up to do it SMS directly, but all of these providers have email addresses. Like I think Verizon is at vzw.com or something. You just put in the phone number at vzw.com, and it'll go as a text. You can send an email as a text. So that's one way to fake it in a closed environment, like within a team. Ori? The question is, we were talking earlier about how these third-party services are collecting data about open rates and click rates. And the question is there a way to ensure that that actually happens? I mean, that's an abstract question, right? Yeah, that's probably a marketing question of having to do with design and that kind of thing. And how do you increase the chances that somebody will turn on images or decide to view the images in your email? I mean, I think it has to do with a ton of factors. One of them is, do they know you? Do they trust you? Do they like you? If they do, they're more likely to click that button in their email application that says, show me the images. Yeah, I think that's a non-technical question. There's no way to, well, let me step back 1 second. There are some services out there that attempt to basically create a kind of large-scale whitelist of senders. I forget what it's called, but it's supported by some email providers. Where you get on this list, you got to give them a whole bunch of information. It's not like you fill out a web form. There's an evaluation process. So if you're a huge brand with a ton of money, you can actually get your emails to display images by default on certain systems. And there's a third-party provider that does that. I feel like it's Sender ID, SendPath. I think that's what it's called. But it's not nothing. I mean, it's a process, and it's not anything that we've looked at.
So a lot of the companies, like MailChimp and these guys, they'll tell you how to write your head, your subject, right? Because it's typically how well you write your subject, right? It may have data at the back of stuff in terms of certain words are going to cause people to open your email more frequently than other words, right? So sort of like you're saying, it's not a technical phrase. It's more like how inviting, how good is your subject thing, And they can tell you what words to kind of use and what words to avoid to increase the likelihood that somebody's going to open your email.
Yeah.
That's sort of what you already had in some of your slides. Like, the more spammy it looks and appears, the less likely people are going to open it.
Yeah.
If it looks like something useful to them, and something they already asked for, they're more likely to open it.
Yeah, that's a great point. The documentation for all these providers, MailChimp is probably some of the best documentation I've seen. And their documentation is not written for technical people, right? It's written for somebody in marketing or kind of a small company, generally, right? They're really good, and it's in their best interest to get those open rates up, right? Because then they can go to their customers and say, look, all the email that your customers are opening.
And a lot of these guys support A/B testing, where you can test different subject lines to see which subject lines get opened more often than other ones. You can do 2 different ones, right? You can see, A was 30% open rate, but B was like a 50% open rate. So I should use B for all my stuff, right?
Yeah. Oh, we got 3 here. We'll start with you, and then we'll work our way back.
Yeah, just on the open thing, that you said if only they open up the images that you can actually find out they're open the mail. but many clients like Outlook have a return receipt thing, right? Does that also send out a small image or is it a different thing?
They have a what? A return to what?
You can a return receipt. You can check a return receipt button, and that sends out a mail back to you saying, the mail you sent.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, the question is, in Outlook, there's a feature that has a return receipt, that you can request a return receipt from the person you're sending to. I don't know how that works. I gotta imagine it sends another email, that gets received somewhere. I just don't know how that operates.
It only works in other.
Okay, yeah, it's sort of within a closed environment. Once you get into Microsoft technology, things don't always follow the typical path. I mean, I'm not sure how that. I don't know what they're.
This works in IBM notes also. Lotus notes also.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never thought about it. Sorry. Right here.
So if you can't use a vendor's assistant on acid to test with your rendering, you have a recommended test, like a minimum set.
Yeah, I don't know. The question was, if you don't sign up for email on acid or Litmus, and what's a recommended way to do it? I would sign up. Seriously, if it's even just a little bit of an important thing to your client or your boss, or somebody who's asking you to do this work, it will save you so much hassle. And it also just gives you third-party validation to the process, because if you've got a client if you've got interested parties who are other than you, who are interested in what these things look like, you'll find so many edge cases where this is rendering here and this is rendering there, and it'll drive you nuts. And if you can go to something like this and just get some sort of third-party support on the fact that you're pretty much where you want to be from a rendering standpoint,
First thing, I just did a little Googling around. There are some templates that some of these companies put out that they can guarantee you X number of, it's an iPhone, it works on Windows Phone, it works on an Android, blah, blah, blah. It's not as good, obviously, as something you pay for, but if you know a little bit more about who your target audience is, right?
Yeah.
And you know that none of these guys have this kind of device or this operating system, then you can kind of narrow down what you have to test for, right? So it's not as hard.
Yeah.
And most of the templates support like all the current modern stuff, right?
Yeah.
But if you have to be 100% spot on for every possible single thing out there, then you probably need to get some commercial service.
Yeah.
You're not going to have enough devices, enough friends with enough variety of devices, to know. Same thing with, with web development. It's not a point where you go, I'll look on your Mac, I'll look on your Windows, okay, we're good, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot more complicated.
Yeah. At the very least, I would test on Gmail. I would test in Outlook, desktop, and browser version of Outlook. Test on AOL, test in Firefox, Chrome. That'll get you pretty far down the road. There's another question right now. Yeah.
Well, two comments. First of all, in regards to the return receipt, that happens a lot. Like Outlook is a very big one for that. If you receive an email that has a return receipt associated with it, most of your mail clients will tell the person who got the email, like myself, if I receive one, hey, this guy's asking for a return receipt.
Mm-hmm.
And you can deny it. Matter of fact, I got a friend of about 5 years, well, I haven't gone with email with him in 5 years because everything he sends is a return receipt.
Yeah.
It just annoys the hell out of me, so I don't even look at it. But,
it's just like, sorry, I didn't see it. I don't know what happened.
No, I've actually told him, if everything you send requires a return receipt, then no.
Yeah.
But anyways, the second thing was just in regards to trying to get somebody to click on an image or a logo or something to trigger that response, to capture the data. Again, it is a marketing play, but in the body of your email, include a small image and make sure it's something that they want to click on it and mention it in the text, such as, oh, look at the cute puppy, okay? Something that someone would want to see the picture of. And all it takes is one click and that will trigger the data.
Yeah. There is, I should also mention, I haven't dug into this too hard, but there are services out there that will take images and somehow render them in a very pixelated way as images. And interpret the data of the images and actually load this sort of halfway loaded looking image and it'll bypass that'll bypass that image being off because it's not an image, it's something else going on. And I've never looked at it hard, but you'll kind of get a sense for like, okay, that's a person, or that's a tree, or that's a house. I forget what that's called.
You don't need to make a white picture. That is what the they just need for a
See, it's white. So you don't know that you're opening it.
Why you said? Yeah, no, but this is for the thing where you want to get somebody to actually click. So if you want to actually show some image data or something that's almost the image data, I forget what it's called. I came across it a couple of months ago, and it's really interesting. It's a pixelated thing that almost looks like I don't know how they're doing it or how it's being rendered, but it's not an image. It's something. Yeah. And it sort of looks like an image, and then when you load the images, there it is.
One comment, one question. Like we send graphs to customers, and basically each image is a custom. It's in the image URL. So our server returns them a PNG or GIF. And oftentimes they tell that they don't. The other question is, how do you handle? We use like Postmark, and we had an issue where our email server went down for a little bit. It started blocking our emails to us. And we had to go onto the control panel in Postmark itself and say, because it was called a hard bounce. We kept track of which emails got through and which emails bounced. How do you manage that?
That's interesting. I don't know how you manage it through what?
We use like webhooks.
Yeah, so the question is how do you manage hard bounces, right? Because that's really the question, right? Yeah. So I know these APIs will stop sending to hard bounces because if their system keeps trying to hammer another system that's already bounced, the reputation of the sending system degrades because it's not obeying standards, right? After a hard bounce, it should stop. So I know that Mailgun, for example, will add that hard bounce to basically a list that it's not going to try and attempt again. If you're running your own system, I'm not, I don't know how to do that.
Another reason not to run your own system.
Yeah.
The team of bounces alone is worth paying for something.
Yeah.
On clicking the image, can't you do something like using other scripts to capture mouse movement? Translate it.
Yeah. You can't. No. The question is, can you somehow get around this mouse click issue by using JavaScript to basically simulate a click, like a click method on an element or something? JavaScript is one of the worst, is one of the least supported technologies in email clients. If you have functionality that relies on JavaScript, you're way down the list of things that are probably not going to be supported. It's very, very little support, unpredictable support for JavaScript and email clients. I don't know of any workaround to simulate a click, and I definitely wouldn't recommend doing it. You want to, for the most part, these are users or they're customers or something like that who you're sending to, and you really want to be respectful of not trying to simulate something that they don't want to happen. Yes?
If they have images app and they open up an email, the server can turn off caching for the image. The server that serves up the image has got to have the right to serve up the image.
Correct. That's how they do it.
You don't have to click it. It's just got to be served.
Yeah, those are two separate things. So open
with the images, right by default.
So those are two different things that APIs typically track. They'll typically track opens, or they'll typically track clicks. Opens and clicks, and they'll track those separately typically. So in order to track an open, all they need is for the email client of the recipient to load that image. That's a 1 pixel by 1 pixel translucent or white image that blends into the background. It's invisible. So that's all they need to register that open. A click, the user has to actually click because they basically wrap the URL that you created in some other URL that hits their system first, registers the click, and then redirects them to whatever URL you actually want them to go to.
I see it sort of like whoever designed and like that, a response to that.
Correct. Yeah, these are usually, yeah, it's good to track who's clicking on your stuff. If it's marketing stuff, obviously, hey, that's somebody who might be a customer, and we're able to know who that is, so let's pay more attention to them. If it's transactional email, it would be good to know if somebody tried to reset their password in, for example, if you're a huge web app that wants to track that stuff.
Saying on track the images, Google's starting to cache the images, so you're gonna probably lose any data that comes out, or any emails that you send to a Gmail account, unless the user is specifically requesting not to have those images cached.
Well, tell me what you mean.
A couple months ago, Google announced that for all marketing emails, they're gonna be caching all the images that go with those emails.
Oh, interesting.
Speeded,
Wow.
The guys are speeding it up.
That's interesting.
They're also defaulting off.
That's what good on the file.
Well, what that would result in, and correct me if I'm wrong though, is if they're caching all those images, they have to make that request. So that means that every email sent to Gmail would appear as though it's been opened. Because in order to cache that, open once, right, in order to cache it. And you're saying they turn the images on by default after that?
Yeah.
That is interesting, isn't it? I wouldn't think that would be the result they'd be looking for.
Yeah, they did it under the guise of,
Performance.
Performance and not being tracked, which of course is ironic to Google.
Right.
Google's tracking it, but there's,
Wow.
I don't think it's quite right, because I think that came out at the same time as they had the promotions. I think they actually just scanned that whole thing with it. I don't know, from the marketing side, there's been no change.
Okay. Gene? Time. 9 o'clock, everybody. Microsoft's a good sponsor to us. They give us this space totally for free. And one of the things that we try and do is get ourselves out of here at 9 o'clock when they want us out of here. So we'll end it now. We'll wrap it up. I'll stick around for a few minutes.
Good discussion. Good. It's all right.
I'm not there, man. You gotta give the books.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, hold on.
Okay.
Thanks. Good job.
Thanks a lot.
Can you do the good voice?
What's that?
Can you do the good voice?
Great job on keeping it.
Awesome. Right on the spot.
So how soon are we gonna start up another beginner?
You kind of run the gamut of beginners, and we've given you several options to actually jump in and finish. This guy is like one of the master finishers of all time. He's like right up there. He's like one level shy.
You're already into the dance.
Actually, okay, nice.
Actually, you don't really kill me.
I haven't been using it for years.
Right. They're teaching table-based layout.
Yeah. And so you can do your email.
Yeah.
Here, I'll see you. Take it easy.
We are open. It's negotiable. It's negotiable. Rough guess, pizza tonight for 100 people. That would go for sure. No more than
Yeah. So it's just, attention.
Yeah, it's basically, this is well, I mean, yeah, we kind of estimate how much people are going to attend, and that's kind of gives us a concept. It's kind of a one-night sponsorship.
So it's Petty mistake or just say, if you call, whatever.
Oh, that's good though, right?
Yeah, what we do, we have a corporate account, we have an account in the local piece of place, and then we're kind of like calls in all places in order, and we're kind of already on their system, so we just sign their sheet and we get a pin for it, so we get. Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. So and then we have to think about what's the P1 element, like, yeah, but obviously you want to get benefit. Short of actually giving you everyone's email address kind of thing, that's kind of now.
Developer too.
Okay, well, that's what I thought. Sometimes you get the cell heights and whatnot, I'll put in that.
I live in Western Mass.
But if you set the.
So you're in Western Boston.
Yeah, so it's Western.
Yeah. All right.
I mean, that would be, yeah. That'd be in a couple days. Is this fair game?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, go for it. All yours. Congratulations.
Easiest prize I've won in a while.
I got Alan to give me one of the other ones.
Nice. Oh, it is basically, yeah, basically.
Yeah, I was really basic. And he left before I was able to get back to him. But I got 2 hits from two of the guys last night.
Oh, from the people you talked with afterwards?
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm just from HR and
Because you're doing
Trinity.
Yeah.
And
Boston Globe.
I know, I didn't get a hit from him.
The oldest startup. I like that. The oldest startup.
Was the
Facebook email.
No, I already answered it.
You did.
Yeah, pretty much told you what I just told you.
Usually it's in a computer lab.